Why don't we get started? If I get everybody's welcome back. We're going to have a couple of just discussions tonight. Two folks from the community are going to come up, and I'd like to see if they're here. I think Beth and Bill. Yep. I think the name's correct. That will be great. And just before we introduce them, and they can introduce themselves better than I can, because we're just meeting for the first time, maybe we should just go around the room real quickly and please let you know who we are. Tell us who you are. How's that? Great. Okay. Mike Smith, I live in the Historic District.
I'm Nick Redding, Executive Director of Preservation Bureau.
Tom Cole, I'm an attorney.
Hi, Thea Lewis. I work at Voices for Children on Main Street.
Gary Moll, resident. Chris Delano, General Capital Fund.
Charles Kyler, Historic District President.
Tim Latimer, I live in Columbia. I'm here representing District 2, and I'm a former environmental planner and semi-retired environmental diplomat.
Shana Hernandez, County Executive's Office.
Andrew Tersigel, Tersigels.
Ed Lilly, Maryland History Tours, EC 250.
Simon from Loudon. Hi guys.
I'm Carrie. I'm a resident, background in nonprofit and organizational capacity building. Work at Abercrombie, resident of Ellicott City, and also deputy director of Minority Goals.
So our goal, the county executive formed a committee to look into the feasibility of establishing potentially a community development corporation. And we've been meeting now for about 6 weeks roughly. And we're trying to meet on an every week basis if the weather and the building infrastructure continues to support that effort. And we've heard from some of the groups that are working in and around Ellicott City at the last meeting, and we've expressed some interest in coming in and just chatting with us about your perspectives, both individually and whether on behalf of an organization. I'd love to hear what your perspectives are on the issue at hand, potential formation of a community development corporation, but more importantly, just your experiences in the district and some of the challenges that you see in the district from either an organizational or a residential standpoint. So I don't know if you coordinated a presentation, you don't need to. This is a very informal discussion. It is being streamed live, so there are cameras here, and wait for parents and others. We've all done it before, but welcome. And I will either Bill or if you'd like to go first.
Bill was going to start with an interpretive dance.
Okay.
In the middle.
Is the middle enough? Let's get elevated.
Yeah, sorry.
Wow.
Would you like me to go first?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That's it's one of the best introductions I've ever heard in my life. Take it away.
So actually, Beth and I did coordinate a little bit. It was mostly to keep each other under the table. We thought we were straying. So my name is Bill Withers. I live on Fells Lane. So for those of you who aren't familiar, there's people who have lived in Ellicott City for years who don't know where that is, but it's a little tributary. I guess the pun is intended off of Ellicott Mills Drive. It was at one time the road into town. There's 11 houses on there, and I did a quick nose count. I think about 30 people. So to give you an idea, that there's the sort of the stock. It's a combination of renters and owners. There's a couple houses from the 1700s, a row of houses from around 1860, and then us skeptics live in the 1901s, so we're from the 1890s. We're the newcomers. I've lived there for 12 years, which actually does make me a newcomer. Fells Lane is also blessed with a lot of county property. So there have been county apartments on Fells Lane since the mid to late 60s. Those were recently demolished and replaced. So that's prettier, but we lost a lot of neighbors and a lot of history, actually, sort of generational folks who've been there for a long time. But it looks like they're full up. I was just telling somebody that once the weather gets good, we'll have one of our events and invite the newbies, the newer newbies than me, down so we can get to know them and kind of incorporate them into the neighborhood. We also have what's been slated or told as a temporary parking lot at the bottom of the hill. That was the site of the Roger Carter Center and has been county property for a long time. It was a school. And then the Fort Piney house, some people call it Granite Manor. So that's the Record Parks property that's down at the bottom. So that's sort of the scope of where we are. There are 2 unnamed streams that run perennially. Well, they have names, but they're not official names. Poopy Creek is because of the recent addition of sewage services on Felsley. So flooding has affected us sort of tangentially, but that's not exactly accurate. One neighbor has been devastated twice, and another neighbor whose house is from the 1700s and has never flooded has had debris bump up against their back porch. So there is new stuff that's happening there. But people always ask about the flood, so to mention that. When our stormwater system blew out on Fells Lane, the wall of water that went down to Main Street was about 4 feet high. So you can hop across these streams most of the time, not recently. And for those of you who, and I might be telling you things you already know, but something that's a little bit different about houses in the historic district. When we talk about a Fells Lane neighborhood association, I think that was why I was contacted. That's pretty much a bunch of people that sit on each other's porches and eat. However, when we've been threatened with development, which unfortunately happens on a regular basis, we've been able to gather 90 people, very short notice to come to meetings. We've garnered support, and we have modified or turned back probably 4 or 5 development attempts in the last 10 years. So it's an active and informed group. It's very diverse. There's a lot of people who volunteer, not just in the city, but other parts of the county, the state. So Shana sent me a questionnaire, and I passed that around. We didn't have a lot of time, but I got some input. Of course, I have lots of opinions of my own. And before I get into that, I think your introduction was very helpful, but is there any type of information that help you in your determination? Because I know your focus probably is all over the place, but the mission is pretty narrow about determining the need for CDC. Is there anything in particular other than what I might have?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about a couple of things. Do you think there's a group out there now that works well with the community, represents the community's interests now, currently? You talked about the informal group that you can pull together on an as-needed basis. It sounds like it's an ad hoc group, but is there anything more formal that you?
Well, a number of us do volunteer for the partnership, the Health and Safety Partnership, and full disclosure, I'm a board member and was an executive committee member for quite some time. I think that as far as that organization goes, it's doing a good job. For it to,
especially considering the funding they have and the
Yeah.
mission that they have right now as assigned to them.
very next thing I was going to say, actually, that's a good point, is if it was going to operate, or if that group or some successor to that group was going to operate at the level of what I think it was the CDC would need, capitalization beyond what it raises in this group. But the assurances and concerns, which go hand in hand sometime when I was asking people about the CDC, is that people don't want to lose the grassroots or community sense that the current partnership brings. There was even some concern that a CDC is easily dominated by a couple of personalities or a couple of business people, and that it would be sort of a cold commercial operation. real, I think people have fought a lot, or at least have stood up a lot to preserve the community essence of Ellicott City, and particularly on Arnold Street.
What kind of skill sets would you think an organization like that might need if, in fact, there were skills you just talked about, the monetization challenge that would present itself, I think, to any organization out there trying to address a challenge like this. But what kinds of skills do you think are needed to address the issues of downtown Ellicott City watershed?
There were some qualitative skills that I collected from folks. They talked about diplomacy, persistence, good network contacts, ability to keep dialogue open, and ability to execute against a goal. Just in my day job, I just got a great job in public-private partnerships. So probably some benefit to experience there.
How would you see the staffing role? Do you have any sense of what kind of staffing you need, skill sets at staff level that might be useful to address the challenges we're facing and trying to address?
I mean, the sort of hard skills or technical skills, other than the qualitative stuff. And obviously, someone would need to have good business sense and be able to balance that with public service. Which I think is probably a tall order. So some of these questions, were sent to me. I got a very blunt response to one question, which I think has some value, though. What are your thoughts about having an organization responsible for overseeing a revitalization effort that is responsive to the needs of all stakeholders in the district? And the first person I asked said, "You mean like maybe the county government?" There is a perception, not that, I mean, the government actually, I would say, and this is not a reflection on any administration, but I would say that there seems to be, from someone that has lived in a lot of different places around the country, there seems to be baked into our system here a strong dependence on quasi-governmental and nonprofit and HOAs to do things that governments do in other places. Probably better, this is an opinion now, and certainly more consistently, and certainly in a way that where they're held more accountable. So that, I think that was behind the kind of wise-ass comment that I got back, like, maybe the county government. And in that same conversation with someone else, it was around that same fear that we don't want to create a bureaucracy of people who are not intimately involved in the community, who aren't true stakeholders, except that they're creating a new stake because there's a commercial opportunity. And I would say that these organizations, if we're going to lean on them to do government work, they should have government funding. I know that there's usually a commercial component that would generate funds, but I think capitalization and guarantees need to have
Bill, what are the questions?
Oh,
Did we get?
I don't know.
Joe, these were just a couple of questions that Mike put together that I forwarded over.
Okay. And actually, Mike has asked most of them.
Yeah,
I can read them
I
out.
just had some notes. For tonight's purposes, I thought I'd write down a few thoughts and encourage anybody, frankly, to ask any questions. Just to riff on that last thought, Bill, for a second. When you think about monetization, there's an asset base in Ellicott City, publicly owned.
Yes.
You alluded to a fair amount of public ownership on Fells Lane, coincidentally. If in fact those assets were pledged toward a CDC, it has all the protections that would normally associate with government instilled in that organization. Could that become a basis from which capital could be created, such that the proceeds of redevelopment and sort of growth of those opportunities over time might be used as a sort of a source of funds to support the broader objectives of community organization? I'm sketching out a theory here. It's not anything that we've talked about internally, but we raise valid about how do you do it? The government will provide perhaps seed money to get something started, but then there may be things, properties that could be pledged to a group like this with all the protections that you just alluded to, so that the group is in fact made up of citizens, has strong citizen and stakeholder engagement, is reportable to a board of directors, has some staffing level associated with it. But if that asset base were made available to them, what are your thoughts about that?
Again, when I was checking with people, that was where some of those fears, and I think that's what you're trying to address now, Mike. But so the question, I forget it was Matt or Tom that asked me, that we're kind of on here as far as my prep. What are the thoughts about giving public assets to the park, such as parking lots at the courthouse, to that organization to develop and use the proceeds to stabilize commercial and residential properties in the district? So one of the things that came up, and I'm paraphrasing it from 3 different people, was a distinction between renovation and development. So enhancing the assets so that they can be used as opposed to filling them in. So I get the acreage around Grand Manor.
5-6 acres.
Yeah.
5-ish. So
So
people have talked about how great that would be as an interpretive center, as a nonprofit center, as a place for projects. And other people over the years have suggested very large houses being built there, condominiums being built there.
5 townhouse complexes.
Yeah. So there's a few ways that people look at it when they say, oh, this is a way that we could, you could certainly generate something by doing that. And I would think that the courthouse, I'm sure there are people looking at any place that isn't already built on in Howard County, but particularly in Ellicott City, it's very desirable to develop it. And so protecting what we have, while understanding that it's not always going to stay the same. Talking to them.
So when you make a distinction, as you just did, Bill, between renovation and development, I think I understand the renovation piece. On the development piece, was there, again, small G folks you talked
Sure.
to, so, but was there pushback on the development side? What were any responses there?
Well, an extreme error from the standpoint, I think I can probably even claim this as a consensus, but I think would be, if there was, say, housing or commercial development on the property where Grand Manor is, or if the courthouse complex was expanded to the point where it was something else.
So, as a resident of the historic district for a little bit longer than you, and one of the things that has been talked about is our sense of community and protecting that sense of community before additional development occurs. So it's stabilize the history, the community, the vital neighborhood that already exists, and then look to those other development opportunities that would fall outside and help to stabilize that, but not to just come in and say, well, this chunk isn't being used right now, so we're going to take it away and plop something new into it.
Yeah, what has been recommended, in my experience, it has not ever been systemic. It's always sort of whack-a-mole of, oh yeah, there's some dirt, let's build something there.
Fought to develop behind the house.
One would
so I missed one of the, apologies, missed one of the sessions. Did we talk about, I mean, is courthouse in play? Is that what, is the CDC being set up for the courthouse? Like, is that?
I think there's a list of public assets when you think about the sort of watershed area. And it's one, Heine House or Henny House, I don't know mispronounce it. Forgive me if I just did. Another one. There may be other assets, the parking lot behind La Palapa comes to mind. You know, there are certain things I can think about pretty quickly, fairly identifiable, that might be resources available to contemplate for the purposes of this discussion. Of course, there's the core buildings that have been savaged by the floods. Another resource, privately owned right now, but perhaps in time they evolve to a different ownership structure, and that ownership structure might be one that could embrace the mission of the CDC. In fact, the CDC is something we're creating. So I think there are a bunch of things, but Matt, to answer your question about why we weren't specifically citing very specific assets, but I just think when you stand above the district, certain things pop out, and maybe others, Matt, they have more experience with the district than I do to recognize other things that might be of some value and interest as we address this change.
Yeah, no, I mean, I only think in that, I totally agree, and these are, absolutely logical assets for us to discuss. And I think some of what I'm trying to do is frame in my head, like, that's great. If we're saying, let's set up a CDC because maybe that would be a perfect ownership structure for the courthouse, that seems to be different from what has hitherto, I think, been a little more nebulous, like, the CDC, which in part might have been some of my own, like, that I think Tom has echoed a little bit, like, what's the problem we're solving here? Seeking to solve, right? So, I mean, if we're talking about organization and the transfer to the courthouse, okay, cool, let's just put it on the table and talk about it that way. But,
So
that's a bigger thing.
So one of the things I think that are starting to happen is acquire other properties, like for the West End. So we're talking about, and those are properties being acquired to solve the engineering problem with flooding. So the question is once that engineering issue has been solved, what do you do with that property? Is there something that can be done to help enhance and bring?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
benefit?
I just think let's write them down and build the list and say, this is the bogey we are.
Well, I think that would be the responsibility of the CDC. I think you would be sort of writing the script for an organization before it's formed. I think to the discussion we had previously that Gary kind of led about what the boundaries of this might be, what the boundaries of the CDC could be, basically potentially anything redevelopment and structure-wise within that would be fair game within the limits of the things that we're talking about with Bill, like, a focus on rehabilitation and renovation over development. And, I think it would have guidelines about what it's going to do. It's not there to do strip mall development and, townhomes. But I don't think you could say, here's the 7 projects that it can work on. That would just be an unlikely way to form a CDC.
Yeah, just to echo a bit of what Matt was saying is, I think some of the discomfort that some have expressed both in this room and not in this room is that this discussion takes on political liabilities and fights that it doesn't necessarily need to take on because of the ambiguities involved. Like, I repeatedly have brought up, if a CDC is pursued, it's not pursued for the sake of making Ellicott City not flooding. So we should make clear that that's not a purpose. It's also not going to be created with the express purpose of bullying out organizations that have built goodwill, such as the Ellicott City Partnership. And nor would it be looking to take away responsibilities and objectives of those organizations. So what Matt was sort of raising is, to the extent we have the opportunity to be practically minded and say there are certain county assets and prospective assets that the CDC may be in a position to help manage and develop in partnership with the Ellicott City Partnership. And I particularly appreciate Bill's comment with regard to the fact that any organization that is in Ellicott City needs to have the soft feel. It needs to have the community buy-in that is hard-won and built up over time. And so I don't want anyone to think that I'm just in here to be a thorn in anyone's side. I'm just nor Matt. I think it's just very important that we understand that to the extent we're ambiguous, and yes, an exploratory committee needs to be ambiguous in many respects. But when we're ambiguous, we are taking on headwinds that we don't always need to take.
But we need to be cognizant of those things. So again, we all help bandwidth, all of us in between the two lanes here, and keep pushing forward. Charles made a point about maybe buckets where there may be properties that are in the bucket for an engineering problem. There may be properties that are privately owned that might be in need of rehabilitation. There might be another bucket of county-owned assets which are really underdeveloped, that are longer-term assets that might over time get played in one way or another. And so that's kind of the way I see the field, and completely agree on the public buy-in and the institutional buy-in, the organizations that exist. I don't think anyone would imagine that this would be a move to usurp any existing effort. It would be a partnering opportunity at best, I would hope, and a way to bring these organizations together, to bring what each organization does best, what the residents do best, engage and come up with something that's more productive and focused and resourceful that addresses whatever challenge comes. Talk about floods, fires happen just as badly in the historic district. We can't predict or prevent all of these things from happening. But maybe we'll have an organization that can help us and lead and champion Ellicott City to make it a better version of itself, which is what I'd love to see happen.
So is the perception here that a CDC will be overstepping its bounds if part of its mission was to provide services to businesses and residents and so on? Well, because I don't know, the sense I'm picking up here.
What residential services are you thinking?
Well, maybe not purely residential service, but more or less services to businesses for some form of economic development or business opportunity development. It's more than just ownership of buildings and redeveloping buildings. It's to provide services to the community at large, I think. I mean, that's just my perception. Am I off track here in that perception, or?
I think back to Tom's point, it's critical for us to define exactly what a CDC is and what it's going to do. They can take on many different forms. If the candidly, if the Ellicott City Partnership did not exist, the CDC may have, in Ellicott City, the CDC may have a more broad and expansive focus than what it likely, this is me talking, but my opinion would be than what it would likely have if we were to create one. Because the Ellicott City Partnership is here, has goodwill, and has a strategic plan and has an executive director and all those things, it would seem imprudent to kind of duplicate that effort. At the same time, the whole presentation we got from Matt didn't mention any type of like hands-on, we're gonna buy buildings, rehab them, flip them, we're gonna have a loan fund, we're gonna develop, a $6 million. None of that kind of thing was there. That's not a part of their plan currently. I suppose it could be. But because there's not that sort of brick and mortar redevelopment component, I think my gut says that if you're going to go down the road of creating a CDC, it needs to be focused in that area where there isn't currently, there is no one meeting that need. And when the market meets that need or attempts to meet that need, it goes off in directions that terrify residents, right? Like, hey, we can redo this historic structure in those 5 acres. Boy, we can turn that into beautiful 1 acre lots with, the most gorgeous vinyl homes you've ever seen. And
You were in the meeting.
yeah, and so there's a place where the market perhaps isn't providing what residents and businesses want. There's a place where ECP isn't, their goal and where they're trying to get to with providing those kind of services to businesses is not something that they're going to do. But there is a need, whether it be the courthouse, whether it be structures acquired by the county, whether it be different things that we, perhaps just from a public perspective, we wouldn't want to see handled in just a way that, makes the best dollars and cents. And I feel like that's where the CDC, particularly in this conversation, would fall in being able to provide those services where either we don't want the market to meet them or the market won't meet them.
So Nicholas, can I add to the question, to Chris's question?
Yeah.
So do you see the CDC providing sort of this comprehensive visioning with all these different
I feel like
places
I
of
mean,
play? Like the vision,
Like the master plan?
not a master plan, and of course, with the engineering that's being worked on now by the county, of course, it's going to play a role in that. But where
There's
does
been
this?
a lot of conversation around this table about the CDC perhaps being sort of the idea that somehow it could provide that level of capacity or that level of management oversight, bringing all the parties together. I think it's unreasonable to, this is my opinion, that it's unreasonable to expect that a new organization very focused on that aspect of the work is going to somehow become that grand convener. But I think that perhaps the challenge in convening right now is that that is a missing piece of the puzzle. So I think perhaps it doesn't lead the convening, but it makes the convening more likely to succeed, because when the conversation, ECP comes in and says, man, there's this building, it's falling apart, this guy wants to sell it, we don't want to see it end up in some, we don't want to see a further consolidation of ownership of Main Street, or however you want to put it. We'd really love to see this developed. Right now, that conversation ends, and it's just like, we'd really love to see that happen. This is an opportunity to have that convening in that meeting, where then the redevelopment, whatever you want to call it, the CDC, is going to then say, okay, let's figure out a financing strategy for us to take this on, and then we're going to work in partnership with ECP, because they know how to get businesses, they know how to get people in the door, they know what kind of niche the market needs in terms of actual sales, and what the business community needs. And so those two organizations work together to solve a need that currently cannot be solved, because there isn't a quasi-public or nonprofit entity able to engage in sort of that direct acquisition, redevelopment, and bringing online of historic structures that perhaps need a little love.
Mike, I just want to make sure we haven't heard from Beth yet.
Shane, well done.
I'm Beth Woodruff. I am the president of the Main Street Residents Community Association. We are a little bit more formal than the organization. For good or bad, that's what we are. We have bylaws, so that changes things. We have 5 board members. I'm president. There's a vice president, a communications director, a treasurer, and a secretary. The current bylaws include all of the residential properties from Ellicott Mills Drive through Rita's, so up at St. John's Lane. Our primary, role in the community is doing flood-related work. That's the thing that affects our community the most. There are more than 80 occupied residential properties in the area that we cover. In our bylaws, you have to have property that adjoins 144 to be able to be considered. So we don't, there's a couple of properties that are kind of up Ellicott Mills, and we leave those to the Fells folks or someplace else. We did not, in our last vote, and that was our pre-18 flood, we did not include the remainder of the historic district could go all the way to the bridge, because you'll probably see when I start describing some of our activities, it's a bigger population than we were comfortable taking on. And as we kind of slowly expanded, at first we were just Rogers to Ellicott Mills, and then we've added kind of this whole nother half. And so adding all of the rental and residents in the rental areas down there, it was bigger than we thought. It was a bigger scope than we felt comfortable taking on as an organization. We have more than 250 people that live in that area. About 10% of that are children. Birth through 12th grade is what we count as a kid. We are a mix of property owners and renters. We have row homes and single-family homes and multi-family homes. Some of the bigger kind of properties have been subdivided into multi-rentals. Some of them, there's a good number of row homes in the community, and then there are a lot of single-family homes as well. We do have a fairly, by percentage, there's a significant number of homes or buildings that are residential or purpose for residences but are not occupied right now for a variety of reasons. Flooding is part of that, to be perfectly frank with you all. We have a very mixed community in terms of socioeconomic as well as just actual like racial and background diversity. We've got a lot of legacy families where the properties have been inherited one generation after the next, and those families are only paying property taxes. And then we've got new folks like me, relatively new folks. We have some population of renters that come and live with us in our community for 6 to 12 months and then are gone. And then we've got other renters who have been in their specific property for 40 or more years, that they've just been renting that entire time. It's a very blue-collar neighborhood. It is not a particularly college graduate kind of neighborhood. I think that's part of what makes that the part of the town that I live in so important and so special, is that we do kind of maintain a working person area where not a lot of Howard County is like that. So it's a very special and unique area. We have folks there who have limited English proficiency, who don't have English as a first language, and don't necessarily, like they require a translator to be able to communicate with, either Google Translate or an in-person interpreter. During the flood, depending on where you were, there was as much as 18 feet of water. Just let that soak in for a minute. 18 feet of water from the typical stream bed level up and out of the creek. 18 feet.
Where did that 18 feet occur?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll testify in front of my house. I have more than 4 feet. I own actually the historic property of Roger Carter. Most of the properties in the neighborhood date back to the 1800s, but not all of the properties have known kind of build dates, if you will. Howard County broke off. This is what I've learned. I didn't research this myself, so it may be partially inaccurate, but apparently at some point Howard County broke off from Anne Arundel County, I think.
Yes.
So the property deeds only go back so far in Howard County. So not everybody's done research to know exactly how old their properties are, but sometime before Roger Carter owned my home, it was the midwife's house. It's kind of the history of the neighborhood, and it's a special place having so many people who have lived there for so long. They are really human witnesses and kind of testify to the history of the properties and who has lived there and who has come and who has gone and all of the drama that has come with all of the houses. So part of the area that we cover is within the historic district, and part of it is outside of the technical historic district. Half of what we are is all within the bounds of ECP, and then the additional part that we have included, that falls outside of the bounds of ECP. When we identified the biggest issues in our community, the two really big things that came up that were just kind of glaring at us were obviously flooding and then speeding and traffic. Those are kind of the two things that as a community everybody can agree on need to get fixed. Nobody can agree on how it needs to get fixed, but they can all agree that those things need to be addressed. So after the 2016 flood and again after the 18 flood, I'm going to kind of run through a list of activities and services that the Main Street Residents Community Association provided the residents. And we can go back and talk about any of those that you want to talk about, but I want to just kind of rattle some off for you. So we participated in the District 1 cabinet meeting with the former representative that allowed us to hear the other issues and communicate our needs and sort of justify our needs over other District 1 needs. I think that was a really useful opportunity for us to share kind of how we fit into the bigger district. We also had seats on the Community Advisory Group, the Master Plan Group, and the Ellicott City Partnership. We partnered with St. Peter's and did door-to-door needs assessments. We identified needs in the community for food, housing, and medical services. Specifically, we had a couple of diabetics in the community that lost their diabetic supplies, and we had a family that was Meals on Wheels dependent, and when the street got closed for flooding, or for, when the street got closed in general, that there was no way to get the Meals on Wheels delivery in. We also had somebody who was undergoing hospice care and has since passed, and there was no way to coordinate the hospice nurses, so we took that on as a thing that we would coordinate with. So in working with the church and the county, we got those services brought into the community so that those really immediate needs would be addressed. A lot of what we do is kind of advocacy for the neighborhood and then also case management, which is a really kind of unique role to be in.
So I'd like to just, put in a vote there as our comment. So best organization, or actually the organization that emerged from that community, is you could write a textbook about community organizing on behalf of the community as opposed to on behalf of a political agenda or something like that. I mean, they found very real needs and addressed them very quickly in an organized fashion.
Thank you. Some more of the things that we did was organize community dinners. We kind of gained a reputation for Thursday night potlucks on the Hill, where folks came, and especially in the beginning after the 2016 flood, we brought in speakers or services that people needed in the community, like flood insurance specialists or Weather It Together. Some of the services for getting the houses fixed, for making sure that people were living in safe environments. We provided or partnered to provide with St. Peter's and NHL after trauma services. We held a trauma, a therapeutic event for the kids in particular, and then we also partnered with them to do community referrals for folks who required health services after the 18 flood. We do the media outreach, or as people are trying to talk to folks in our community, we know who in the neighborhood is willing to talk to the media and who's willing to take those on, and we direct the media to the proper folks, and it sort of saves the rest of the residents who prefer to remain private from having to constantly fend off media attention. We are a communication hub. We, following the floods for however long we deem necessary, we have a newsletter that's delivered door to door so that residents can know what's going on in the community, can know when the meetings are happening. Because many of us live in homes that have been severely damaged after each one of these floods, there is not necessarily internet connection. People are, like after the 18 flood, people needed things as simple as refrigerators. So we were kind of the go-between in the community between St. Peter's and the things that we were asking for, and kind of trying to partner with things that had been donated. So like St. Peter's hears about a family that wants to donate a living room set, and then the community association kind of looks at our list of the door-to-door needs assessment that we've done and sees who's first, who's in need. Second, kind of based on a series of questions, who is the priority of that need, and then thirdly, who's ready to accept it, because we're kind of living in these construction zones. Not everybody is able to, even if it's a need, not everybody's able to accept it. So for instance, if your electricity has gotten flooded out, yes, you need a refrigerator, but until your electricity is fixed, there's no use in giving you the refrigerator. You can give it to somebody who has power and give you a chest cooler or 2 or 4 to try to get you over the hump as we get through the immediate aftermath. We've also engaged with the county on all the issues on flooding, as well as parking and speeding and other issues in the neighborhood, and testified. Many of us have testified at the county repeatedly, but also a number of us have gone to the state and testified for state bills to try to get funding for Howard County to be able to help us. So, and whatever we can do to secure the future of the residents in the neighborhood is really our mission. And if that's, finding you a refrigerator, or if it's finding you a therapist, or if it's, putting you in touch with, whatever need or service, or just being a shoulder to cry on and having you come to community dinner and participate. We try to address all of the needs of the community. We also use the volunteer program from Howard County during the 18 flood and solicited for volunteers and completed a 60-person stream clean that went from roughly West End service to, Ellicott Mills Drive. We filled a dumpster and a half, and we ran out of time and disposal resources, so we weren't able to get to the rest of the stream, but at least that part of the stream got cleaned.
So
that's why nobody wants this job.
You are to be commended.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Your group, I mean, if you talk about a safety net, I can't imagine anything better than what you just described, what your organization does with limited resources, I'm sure. And
Yeah, our operating budget is $100, and we've never actually collected it because people have better ways to spend their dollar membership. So the supplies and everything else comes out of the pockets of the board members at this point.
the funding for all the services that you provide, the long list of services?
So what we're really doing is providing referrals and connecting people with services. Many of those services, like therapists and things like that, we don't pay for. That's donated, and we've partnered with either the county or the church to be able to connect those things. But yes, we've never collected our whole dollar fee. So everything that we're doing is on our own time and out of our own pockets.
I mean, one of the things that I noticed is a volunteer that came down after the 2 floods living nearby is that, again, bringing it back to our tight-knit community, the people who live here were the first responders. That, you know, we all came together. So if somebody needed something, if they needed their kid picked up after school, if their car was washed away and they needed transportation, you would say, yeah, I can help take your kid to and from band practice. But all of those came through very informal networks. The church started really kind of becoming a hub and consolidator. ECP started becoming a consolidator of a lot of those services where they became the initial points of contact, and then kind of like grassroots for Howard County, you go to grassroots, and grassroots will then serve to help take all of this larger umbrella and really put you in contact with exactly who you need.
So Charles, that sparks a couple of other things that we did that I forgot to mention. We used that same group of volunteers. We reached out to, I don't know if you guys are familiar with how the process worked, but you were given a set list of contacts for people who had gone to the county. I don't even know at this point what group it was in the county, but they were basically raising their hand saying we want to volunteer. So we had one of our advisors who doesn't live in the area. We have a couple of special advisors that we partner with. And she reached out to all of the volunteers, organized a sign-up genius that allowed us to get bands of volunteers to come in and do things like muck out basements in an organized and controlled way so that property owners were comfortable. We knew who was coming in. We could have them banded and get through security. And then also assign them to different properties. And as the work in one property for that day was done, we would kind of move folks throughout, which also requires a coordination of things like water and snacks to ensure that people are staying healthy, especially when it's super hot. And I forgot what the other one was, but yeah.
So do you have periodic community-wide meetings that people from the community that you serve attend?
Yeah, so we were doing Thursday night community dinners, and those kind of fell off once. Well, we did them through the first flood. We did them for almost a year straight, every Thursday night, and it was potluck. And you came and you just showed up, and if you could bring something, you brought something. And if it wasn't your week, then you didn't, and it's kind of come as you are. But it was a way to be able to level set with the community and say, okay, so here's the status of the ECP, application, or here's this other thing we think you should know about, and here's what the deadlines are, or here's when the meeting is happening. Since we've kind of done this a couple of times now, we still have the need for that paper distribution, and we know a little bit more. Oh, okay, well, I'll talk to Bill, and Bill will talk to Nick, and Nick will talk to Mike, and we kind of know how to work those networks a little bit now. But to answer your question, yes, we are overdue for our re-election at this point. But if anybody wants to move to the stream, hell, that'd be great.
We have some great cooks.
We do. We got some good people, some good food.
Beth, when you think about
Yeah, right,
the
right.
challenge this group has discussing a community development corporation, what are your thoughts about that? How would it work? How would it benefit your group?
So the only, and another difference that we have from Bill's group is that the only kind of county-owned or municipal-owned property we have in that area is the colored school. Everything else is residential. We don't have any parking lots up there. The few parking lots that we do are attached to businesses that own the property. So I'm not, and that was kind of my question for you, Chris, was, what do you mean in terms of residential service? What can you do for me?
Well,
And
yeah.
how can you make this much shorter? That's really like where it sits with me.
So you described my perception of a CDC. Now, I know the CDC takes on many forms, but my perception of the CDC is providing some of the services that you discussed to the residents, to the business community, and to residents who are involved in business or have a desire to become involved in business. If something happens, whatever it might be, the flood or some other type of disaster, or just something is critical, is maybe I'm not against big box stores, okay, I keep talking about it. But a big box store tries to come and move into the community, buy a building that's operated by a business person who might have for sale. Maybe the CDC shouldn't be the one to buy it. Maybe the CDC should be the organization that finances the resident who wants to buy that structure to operate their business or to expand their business. So these are some of the
I
things.
think when we circle back and think about who actually lives in the community, we're really missing the boat. If your hope is that we would be only partnering with folks who have a desire for business. Because the folks that live in and around me, well, not in me, but in and around my neighborhood. Yeah, I carry them all in my heart, really. Those aren't folks who have the capacity to be able to engage in business. They're not necessarily even folks who frequent downtown all that often. They're folks who maybe don't even have internet regularly, let alone after the flood. So I think we would be cutting off a big part of the community if the only thing the CDC looked at was business ventures.
I think if you think of a CDC that's inclusive of all the neighborhoods, it would be similar to what we see in an urban area, like an economically shocked area. Because it needs to be a combination of the community organizers, the church, the government.
And I think, Bill, you just touched on a big point about the economically shocked piece, because I think that's why we're here. Ellicott City has been economically shocked twice. It's going through post-traumatic stress disorder on a huge scale. And at the end of the day, the question is whether or not we need to bring an outside organization to pool the efforts of the different organizations, or possibly be formed from within, who knows, to tackle those problems. While I was listening to you, Beth, I Googled really quickly, because I have this perception that everybody here seems to think that the CDC is to come in and all they're gonna do is develop, right? A CDC, which is a community development corporation, does the following activities: provides affordable housing by renovating or building for sale or rental properties. So there's the renovation piece that Bill spoke to.
And the affordability piece that Beth spoke to.
Right. Undertake economic development projects, develop real estate attracting businesses, forming new businesses, providing job training, managing summer work programs, revitalizing a commercial district and such. And keywords: revitalizing a commercial district. Provides social services, shelters, community poverty, release casework, substance abuse programs, social skills and budgeting training IDAs. Assist neighbors in getting to know each other, building social capital or community organizing. So some of that's already taking place. We're talking about whether or not we need it on a grand scale by an organization that's appropriately funded with the mission to accomplish all of these things.
And it's not to push aside the existing organizations, to help bring them all into a single umbrella, very much like the church did on a
And I would be totally remiss if I didn't read this part. which has organized both routine and ambitious cleanups of abandoned buildings, brownfields, or even parks or streams.
There may have been some guerrilla cleanups of some of the unoccupied, but I didn't know anything about it. I just know that some days they look better than others.
Mysteriously happened.
Yeah, and no CDC has to do all of those things.
Right.
So it doesn't.
But it would be a conduit, it would be a conduit for other organizations to come to for funding or for assistance, for whatever.
I try to compile a list of some attributes, and I absolutely appreciate everything we just heard, but, and I've shared this on the package that we all have, but skill in contemporary placemaking within a historic context. There's something very unique about this particular neighborhood that's historic, that is a big part of the story. Second thing, expert in real estate asset management and redevelopment. It's composed of financial geniuses, people who really understand how to make money work for the community. Experience in creating and nurturing public-private partnerships, to Bill's point earlier, P3s are a critical aspect of this, and making public-private partnerships work in this context. Capable of soliciting and reviewing bids and proposals, that's a skill set of being able to hire consultants, engineers, architects, land use attorneys, others to really advise and build upon sort of the base that we're trying to create here. Experience in negotiating contracts of all forms, leases, financing agreements, sales, joint venture agreements, ground lease agreements, listing agreements in the event brokers are going to be involved, architectural engineering, master planning agreements, construction agreements, redevelopment agreements. The list of skills and agreements goes on and on and on. An ability to create and implement a community-driven redevelopment plan, replete with continuous collaboration with all stakeholders. That, to me, is what a successful organization at this scale is truly about. It's embracing the Bills and the Bests and the rest of us to try and create something that's special, unique, and that can work for all of us.
So where does that dovetail?
Well, that was last week's discussion.
Sorry, I was late.
No, there's a video available online. You can take a look back, and the gentleman in the back here runs the Economic Development Authority, presented to us just last week. And you're welcome to address this directly if you care to.
I don't need to take the whole picture.
No, it's perfectly consistent with what we're trying to address.
Well, I mean, I would say a lot of those capabilities legally exist within our construct. Our legislative authority has those capabilities within it. We don't have those capabilities active right now. We don't own buildings or anything like that, but we have those capabilities within our legal construct. So I think it's all about, do you, and somebody had said it earlier, do you use the existing entities that are available and build on those, or do you create something completely different? But a lot of those capabilities exist. I mean, particularly as it relates to business assistance and, business creation, business mentoring, those types of things.
Thank you.
Tim, you've been waiting patiently. Did you have something?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Beth and Bill, for coming and talking about this. This has really been very helpful. And I do have a question, but maybe I'll preface it with a comment just in reaction to what Brooke and Mike were saying. It seems to me that perhaps the operative word is community, in terms of community development, as opposed to the concept of land development.
Right.
But going back to your discussion, Beth, you described what strikes me as some very basic needs in the community: a refrigerator, furniture, just basic needs that people needed to get back on their feet. Could you talk a little bit about the sorts of challenges the community has been facing, particularly in the wake of the floods, in terms of things like getting insurance, getting financing to renovate and rebuild, and what kind of challenges the community members may have faced in trying to access financing? And if there was, say, a community development corporation where one could go and maybe seek some kind of low-interest loans or other kinds of loan guarantees or grants or whatever it might be to help get back on their feet. I mean, were there gaps that the community encountered that a CDC could help to fill?
Absolutely. I mean, yes. The problem with the loan idea is that our properties keep getting flooded. So if you have a loan from 2016's flood, you still have that loan. And now you have to take out a second loan, probably to repair much of the same damage. So we're constantly paying to repair things that are destroyed, but are necessary to stay in our homes. So
Water heater.
in order to, I'm sorry?
Water heaters.
Yeah.
The number of water heaters that were wiped out.
Electric box, I mean, washers, dryers, refrigerators, I mean, everything on your entire first floor, and many of these properties are only first floors, or only have bedrooms upstairs. There are already concerns in some of the, I want to speak broadly because I definitely do not want to, one of the reasons we have trust is that we don't spill the beans on any particular place. So forgive me for speaking very broadly, but I would prefer to protect the privacy of the people. There are plenty of families who have a hard enough time paying the taxes on the property that they own that taking out a loan is not realistic. We have partnered with some folks like Weather It Together and some of the other services, but we fall into this very unique category where if you have anything, you don't qualify for grants. If you don't, so then you're kind of in the loan, but then how many loans can you take out, and how year after year does that mess up your finances, right? I mean, think about, it's basically like, you know, adding a car payment every 2 years without having time to pay off the first one. Well, cars are a huge thing that got lost too. I mean, many of them got moved, but when a flood comes in the dark, they're all going to be gone. So I do think that there are opportunities, but I think I have even personally, and I will share this with the group, it's me and my family and I can. But when I looked at the loan process and I looked at some of the opportunities for grants and loans in the county versus like the Small Business Administration loan that came out, you can only apply and get one of those. So it's a challenge to figure out who's going to pay first, who has the best interest rate, who's going to be able to pay for the most number of your like the most amount of your damage, and who's going to give you the most flexible repayment. So those are all real challenges, and when we're talking about folks who maybe are used to balancing their checkbook but maybe aren't necessarily financially minded, those decisions get exponentially harder.
Just a quick follow-up question. Are you aware of any people in the community who may have found it impossible to get insurance anymore after what's happened? And secondly, are there folks who, because they've been on the land for so long and may have difficulty, let's say, retrieving viable land title? I mean, I've heard of other instances in other parts of the country where people could not get FEMA assistance, for example, because they couldn't produce a land title.
So
Are there any
we
folks in
don't
the community who face
qualify.
that?
Yeah. So let me hit FEMA first, and then I'll go back to insurance, and I'll make myself a little note so I remember. So the FEMA, because Ellicott City is not a large enough part of Howard County, we don't qualify for FEMA individual insurance, FEMA individual assistance. Meaning, the county services or the in-kind support, like the in-kind volunteer hours and all that kind of thing, are reimbursable or portions of them are reimbursable to the county from FEMA. But at the property owner level, we are not eligible for individual assistance. So there aren't any opportunities to even partner with FEMA or anything else. I mean, the most we get out of FEMA and MEMA is the fact that they can do some crowd control for us, and they can help bring in like the state patrol or whatever they were that closed the road off and that kind of stuff. So it's not to say that they're useless at all, but in terms of recovery efforts, they don't have anything to offer us because we are not a large enough part of the county. So to the insurance aspect, yes, plenty of the homes that are owned do not have flood insurance. It's not because it's not available, it's because it's financially out of reach. And I will say of my property, since I have lived there, it has doubled twice.
Your homeowner's insurance.
No, not my homeowner's insurance, my flood insurance.
Your flood insurance.
Which I carry
Can
both.
I ask what's your elevation letter? Are you with AA and X?
I have no idea. I sit right there, I get the water, I don't know. I do sit about a half, the way my home is constructed, I sit about a half a story up. And maybe even a full story in case another bank goes and things like that.
Yeah, but you're less than 50 yards from the riverbed, right?
Oh, I'm less than 8 feet from the riverbed, the closest point, yeah. Yeah.
Gary?
I applaud both of these. It's about community. Bill, you mentioned sensitivity. Whatever we do, it has to be sensitive. This place is just too difficult. We talked about development. The problem is you've got tract kind of housing, for example. They try to put it into Ellicott City. It's too steep. Those building typologies do not work. And yet you're not allowed many times to do anything other than code-wise what's tract housing. It's just a detail. I don't want to get into the weeds. Again, to the sensitivity, there are so many resources, community-wise, organization-wise, in Ellicott City. It'd be very foolish of another organization to come in and try to take all of that together. I think that's something that would happen down the road. I think in the near term, whatever the organization is, it can help facilitate things happening. It would seem that it would be able to provide short-term monies, access to monies. It would help you facilitate, as residents working collectively. Yes, individually you may not be able to get the insurance. I've got, I don't know how many houses.
That is one of the things when we had one of our community dinners, we looked at would we be able to, as a community, band together and get some sort of special insurance and have it be cheaper, like a Lloyd's of London kind of thing or something like that. And the answers all came back basically no. Yeah, you did also the flood group.
That was actually just because I feel so loosey-goosey next to you. But we actually did create officers at one point because we were putting...
Trying to compete.
No, we gave up. No, because we were raising funds for legal services at one time, but also looked into the same thing. And not to take us off on a tangent, but just Gary speaking reminded me. So where Gary lives is the top of a mini watershed that drains through one of the unnamed streams of Bell's Lane. And because of the way that rules are administered, is due for development. So that 4-foot wall of water can wipe out one of the oldest homes in all of the city, and several cars, and a lot of other private property. We haven't done the study, but I'm expecting it will be important.
It's all connected. That's why I think it's the watershed that defines whatever we're approaching. And the concept of working collectively and having an organization that sensitively could facilitate things, maybe not take ownership, just get them kick-started, before the flood. I don't know if your residential group came in, existed, but after the flood, maybe you could go to an organization, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, I got people who want to do something, help me. Fine, we'll make it happen. Figure it out later. It's something like that.
Some level of coordination.
Yes.
I mean, my standard speech to the county council over the years has been that we have a daisy chain of minimum requirements in the county when it comes to stormwater management. So every new development does just what they need to do. And from a business standpoint, I understand why that's the choice. Although the county agencies also do the same thing. And so what we end up with are, and then there's legacy stuff for no standards. So the cumulative effect is that there's really no system to manage that.
Well, see, and the reverse is, if you had an organization, whatever it is, it may be able to help create new policy for this watershed. It's different than the rest of the county.
I feel like there's a role for our representative at the council to be able to do that.
Yes, but I think the technical aspects of it, come out of an organization. It have engineering, planning, architectural, whatever, access.
Isn't that sort of what, doesn't that I think that's what you're saying, but isn't that sort of duplicating?
See, yes and no to that, Matt. So for instance,
Yeah.
to his point,
I mean, we pay already for a whole department that
Yeah,
has
but
those specialists.
The department's only going to do that if there's political will.
right, so one of the things
Well,
that
it
we've got.
doesn't need to be political will, it can be community will.
Well, I mean, I'm saying political is a
Sorry,
small
Charles.
thing, not a-
I'll bring up a classic example of, I think, what you're talking about. When a new subdivision is put in, even inside the historic district, a traffic survey is required to be done. So for one that was put in down by my neighbor here, the traffic survey was done at the intersection of Rogers and Route 40 and Montgomery Road and Old Columbia Pike. Nowhere near the neighborhood it was being built in.
I mean, I think that we can argue the quality, because we
Well, no,
had a
this-
similar thing where we complained about speeding, and we got a speed study done while the road was still closed after the 16 flood. So
Right.
I think that there is room for improvement
Right.
across the board, but I don't know that duplicating efforts is ever
This
the
isn't-
thing that creates efficiency.
Well, we're not talking about duplicating here. What we're talking about is if this comes in, this would be, again, taking into consideration those things that currently are pigeonholed. And the part about bringing all of these experts together, as well as the current and local people, is that you're able to say, wait a second, there's a donut hole here. We're missing something. And you know, stormwater management, it's right now it's property by property basis versus what's the aggregate happening there. Can this neighborhood even afford another 10 gallons of runoff?
Charles,
Okay.
I want to be careful, I want to caution that from my perspective, as I see this group and our mission, we're not here to solve policy issues relative to land use in the county. I think elected officials, I think there's a department, there are many departments that engage with that. This might be an organization we're creating that will have a voice in that discussion, but I don't really see it as the organization through which those issues about stormwater management, traffic control, get studied to what depth is really part of what this group should be about addressing, because I think we can all go off on a huge tangent. The thing that I pick up today from this discussion is we've got an organization that focuses on a certain bandwidth of Main Street. We've got another organization that has a tangent to that Main Street. I live on another tangent, College Ave. Gary, you live on another one called Church Road. And maybe this organization, if there is an organization, it's bringing these voices together, and so that we have the ability to communicate better with each other about common needs, and we find common solutions. And we work through this organization to help elected and appointed officials embrace the things that we need to see embraced so that the changes happen in reasonable ways. Not that we devolve into arguments about traffic studies, we go on and on. We go on and on about waivers with regards to stormwater management. That's not what I think we're about. I think those are challenges certainly we face, but I think we've got a broader, upper level issue we're trying to address here.
I guess from the discussions I've been listening to, the recorded ones, thank you, Peter, and Nicole, thank you. But then also what I've heard tonight, I just don't see a lot of focus on the residential area, which makes up a significant portion of the historic district and the watershed. And I'm just not sure what a CDC can provide us that's not already being provided in one form or another.
So I could take a stab at it.
I think
if
Kelly
I
was
were-
gonna go though.
Carrie, just start
Carrie really wants to
talking.
talk. I just have a quick question. So the idea of leveraging resources and bringing them into the community is what excites me about the CDC entity, whatever it ends up being, or not. But my question is for Bill, for you, actually for Tom and Matt too. Where's been, other than the Community Foundation and their role in giving out the grants or giving out assistance in the second flood, where's the community, I should say, where's the foundation community been in all this? Has anybody come to you or stepped up for the foundation community within Maryland? Just wondering.
I'm sorry, United Way participated in the 2016 recovery effort, but the United Way was significantly constrained in the manner in which it could distribute funds. Ellicott City being the unique place that is, being able to support businesses was outside of the
Yeah.
United States mission.
Right.
The Community Foundation, again, Matt can speak more to that, they had their own fund in the 2016.
That was like
flood.
2 million, right? About 2 million?
So
That they gave out.
ECP collected in
Yeah.
the two floods, 2.4-ish, 3-ish, 4-ish.
Total, not each.
Total.
Not each
Total,
flood,
yeah.
total.
Total. More than
1.8
60,
was-
1.8 or 1.6 in 16, so we got more than 60. Now, this was ECP collecting from whoever would give it to us on behalf, that we dispersed
Yeah.
with a grant application for residents and businesses and property owners, and it was, graduated and all that sort of stuff, right? And we wanted to make sure no fraud, blah, blah, blah. And then we leveraged Community Foundation of Howard County, because these guys actually, for a living, disperse money, right?
Did they match that at all, or they just gave away what you collected?
No, so they collected stuff as well.
Okay.
Now, we gave, everything that we collected went to people within our catchment area. That was the point,
Okay.
right? So there were people who were outside our catchment area,
Like Dunlop.
and they would help, because there were lots of people affected that.
Sure.
That would be Dunlop,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
are other,
The larger
there are other
flooding.
neighborhoods,
Right,
yeah.
and we just couldn't, they're not in our catchment
Sure.
area, right? So they did raise money outside of that. There was no matching, and one of the things that and I don't want to jump out of order, and Nick, I know you want to, I would urge us all to not think that setting up a CDC comes with it, and I know you're not saying this, Gary, but I've kind of heard some things here, like it implies that there's this magical, mystical pot of money.
Right.
There isn't.
There is none. And
And in fact, it's all
your
getting
cards.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Is
Right.
that a card that has been played yet? And from what I'm hearing, is maybe not.
Well, I don't know what the card is. What's
We
the
don't
card?
have-
Or is that has not been a resource that has been tapped?
As a community association, we are focused primarily on the immediate needs.
Sure. And
then
you don't have
kind
time
of-
to go out and loot funders.
We didn't even in 16 have the time to figure out how to connect with the county list of volunteers and send that email. It was only in the 18 flood when we had advisors and could kind of farm that work out to people who were less directly affected, but who still had a stake in our community, that we were able to leverage that. So certainly drumming foundations up and things like that is well outside of what we're able to do, especially now that storm season's coming again.
Right.
But Carrie, I would also add that 2016 was probably the high water mark for philanthropy contributions into Ellicott City. I mean,
Okay.
we were receiving contributions from all over the country,
Sure.
if not the world.
Yeah.
The world.
And so.
But these are
the
individual
20
small donors.
But
100%.
foundations, no foundations,
And
I mean,
foundations, yeah, okay.
there were big checks aplenty in the Ellicott City partnership. Everybody wanted to take a picture given their big check. And that
Well,
included
what's
some.
a big check for you? For you as a
I'm just saying foundations participated, they were aware of it, and to Beth's point, in
And there
those
were business
circumstances,
owners,
it's
business owners.
business owners as well. It's not necessarily something that you can go fundraise upon, because there is not the Ellicott City Partnership is not a flood relief organization.
Sure.
So after that was done, there was no plan to keep a residual fund into the future. And I being involved in that process, particularly the EC Strong Committee and working with United Way on that, because of our unique mission and the fact that the Ellicott City Partnership did give money to businesses, that also makes it difficult to raise because those foundations have limitations on whom they can give money to.
Absolutely. So the broader your foundation is, if you have residents, if you have business, if you have a certain geographic area, the broader, sometimes it can work in your favor that you are eligible for. So just something to think about is your scope.
So I think one of the things that, being kind of I serve on the Ellicott City Partnership Board, and I think we really did experience donor exhaustion in 18 compared to 16. 16, these were shocking videos that went viral and across the world. I mean, like, I watched it for the 16 flood. I watched it from my parents' house in New York the morning I drove back. Like, I got a call at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they said, "We don't know if you still have a house. You need to come home." And when I came, I was like, "What? What is happening?" They're like, "Ellicott City is gone." So when I was like, what is happening? And my dad's like flipping through the channels, and all of a sudden I'm seeing town, and it was that night. So I think that kind of punch in the face that everybody got really led to a very generous outpouring of support in 16, but they they still know our name 18 months later when we flood again and the same videos are there. And folks are going, I gave money to that last time, why haven't they fixed that yet?
And there's competing, campfire, like unfortunately, we, as a world, and this has been happening a long time, but it seems to be happening a little bit more, there are many things that require us all to step up and assist our fellow residents and so on and so forth.
Mike has only got that. Mike. Got it 10 minutes.
I'm sorry?
Got about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think less actually, if I look at the clock correctly. More like 5. But I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, I was just gonna, and I mean, to Carrie's point about the foundation landscape, I mean, I feel like that's a separate conversation we could kind of have about what foundations are supporting community development and where they tend to be clustered, and who might be willing to provide support to that.
And are they more apt to supply it when you have the type of expertise that Mike listed?
They're more apt to supply it in Baltimore City because that's where the majority of the large foundations exist. Howard County, just because of the age of the county and the age of when the wealth developed in Howard County, does not have a foundation legacy like the rest of the state has. There are sort of pockets of the state. I mean, it's one of the wealthiest counties today, but because it wasn't 150 years ago, there isn't that legacy of wealth here, and so many of the foundations in Baltimore City will not cross over into Baltimore County, and specifically won't cross into Howard County because it's perceived as a wealthy county that does not need the support and services of the foundation
And
community.
if I recall correctly, also, we don't have a great reputation for altruism. Like we're not.
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, when you compare us to other counties in the state, and I know this from my work with Getting Ahead, we're not the biggest givers.
There's a joke on Phelps Lane that we want to meet the guy that screwed up the curve and made us the richest county in Florida.
I was just going to say, when you were saying like how could a community development corporation support residents, and you made a good point about the value of it being a working, I think you called it a working class community, and trying to preserve and maintain that. And the preservation of affordable housing is a whole component of the affordable housing landscape. It's both the creation of affordable housing, but the preservation of existing affordable housing. So when you have multi-generational families, if that passes out of that family and then passes into the market, you have eliminated affordable housing.
Absolutely.
So if there's a vehicle or a mechanism in place that could create permanent affordable housing or permanent workforce housing and prevent that from passing out, I mean that seems to me like but that's a longer term residential value.
It is and isn't, right?
But
So those are things that we have as a community as a community really tried to further with our kind of advocacy role. Like even something as simple as giving tax credits in the amount of the property tax until the flooding stops would be tremendously helpful. Or giving tax credits in the amount of flood insurance would be tremendously helpful. Or doing both. I mean, those things I don't think are such a financial burden on the greater community that they should be off the table. They just didn't kind of get above the line to get looked at with all of the other stressors going on. So, I mean, I think that there are solutions, and we have to keep people in houses, but especially for the kind of legacy families, the long-term families, it's really necessary. I don't know where my neighbors will live if they have to move in many cases. They certainly won't be homeowners anymore, and I think that's very upsetting.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to stay. We need to find a way to encourage that to happen. So whether it's through this entity, some other entity, there needs to be a mechanism. And I appreciate the legislative ideas you just put on the table. I think those are wonderful, well-principled approaches to use or offset the tax burden temporarily because of the challenges of things that haven't been addressed. And if there's some way to ease the pain, I think that's a great thought. We all should embrace somehow and help champion that outside the lane of what this group is about.
If the river doesn't rise, I'll be happy to help.
Yeah, we're hoping that it doesn't. By the time we get our work done, other things are announced. I see we're almost at that moment when we wrap things up. I spent some time trying to organize some thoughts, which I'll leave with you in writing with respect to There's some old business about opportunities and resources in the Ellicott City watershed. I think we've beaten that pretty well to death at this point. Challenges of current oversight and opportunities, resources in the Ellicott City watershed area. And then context, which I think begins to get us into the CDC discussion realm, where I'm hoping next week, and Shane, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we probably need to get some CDC folks in here who are running organizations next week or the week after, and that's what my hope would be, and I don't know if everyone feels the same way. We're on board here, but I really like to get some folks in that are running organizations like this who can help us understand a little bit better from their perspective how to meet the needs of community, business, existing residents, and future residents as well. So
Mike, is the intent of the two-pager here, is this meant to be, this is sort of just kind of what you're thinking, just throwing spaghetti on the wall? Or is this?
It's what I sent out back in February. On February 26th, I think there was a distribution date in our first meeting, and these are the materials from that.
Right.
So there was a sequence of sort of a walkthrough, how we get to a point where we make a decision about the CDC, and part and context of that.
Because some of the things we've talked about tonight, the devil's in the details, right? Like anything in life tonight, of course. But some of there's some assumptions that are in here that currently there is no organization equipped to measure ability. I mean, certainly you can argue the government has a role here, and I'm not sure that what we're lacking is an organization or set of organizations to rebuild. I think actually one role of government is to say, here's what we're going to do. And it may or may not be enough, and maybe there are private citizens who seek to do stuff, and maybe there are organizations. I'm not saying that at all, but I think that there are certainly some roles, we touched a little bit on, there are some roles in government. They may not be doing it the way you want it, and the way we all want it. I'm not putting you on the spot, Charles, but that's a function of, hey, step up and do your job better. But that doesn't mean let's reinvent DPZ if it exists, and it is a common function within the public policy sphere of a government organization at the local or regional level. I just wouldn't
say planning department should oversee the master plan implementation.
I don't know about implementation, but I think there are a lot of assumptions buried in here that I don't know that I just don't want to say that, like, I agree with all this. I haven't, we have to digest, and maybe we have a vote on it. Do we agree each bullet point on these things? I don't know. But if we're deciding whether or not to recommend the formation of the CDC based on a statement of X, Y, and Z, then I think we literally need to talk about statement X.
Well, that was,
we concurred.
What are the challenges, and have a discussion, because how can you decide on a solution until you know what the challenges are?
Well, absolutely. That's what I think we've all been saying. What's the problem seeing to solve?
It might be helpful if you went bullet by bullet and identified where that need is being filled in the community, who does that currently, and if it's being filled. And the more kind of stakeholders you hear from, like, me and Bill, I'm sure you didn't have any idea of all of what we were doing in our independent communities, but as you kind of hear, maybe you guys bring DPZ in and talk about like what their role is, and bring Kate and Kristen in and talk about master plan, and then figure out what should fall under the scope.
There seems to be a perception that I'm certainly biased in terms of what I write. I think we all have our own biases in terms of how we're approaching this, but a perception that it's not working. What we have doesn't work. That's just my perception. And I'm trying to tackle this from the perspective of, okay, it's not working. What could be created to work better?
And where's the role of holding the existing folks accountable? So there are organizations or roles in the community that could be done better. I think probably everybody agrees on that. And where is it that a CDC could or should fill in the gaps or take over? And where is it where we just need to get a backbone and say, you're not doing your job?
So
not you, but
I get many fingers pointed at me. That wasn't personal. I get that. But part of what I'd like to do is to just get some folks in there to run CDCs to try and understand how they were created, why they were created, what challenges were they meant to address, how they've done addressing them. And we're not here to dissect them and make self-examination, but it would be very beneficial, I think, for all of us just to meet some of the folks that are in the field doing this today and see if, in fact, the reasons that those entities exist and what they're addressing was really addressed and resolved by the creation of these organizations.
And if I can suggest a question, I think it would be a really great question to ask. What entities did you fill in the void for, or replace, or consume, or partner with in order to develop your CDC?
This is a hybrid thing. It has aspects of governance, it has aspects of the public and private sectors, community engagement. It is something that's unique. It's different in every place it's applied. I don't think there's one cast in stone version of CDC, notwithstanding, definitional information we can find online that's very helpful. It helps educate all of us what to do, but it's our thing. It's going to be something that works for us.
If you decide to do it, right?
If it happens, or if it doesn't happen. If in fact there's a consensus here that the recommendation is, we're fine, we've got it covered. This base, that base, that base. And don't worry about downtown, it'll be taken care of. That's the perspective. That is the perspective. But I personally feel we need something more. That's all. It's just me.
Yeah, like less rate.
Or accountability.
Yeah, I don't know how to turn that off, but, might win the
turn
lottery tonight if I
accountability
figured that out. I might win the lottery tonight, but, so we're going to convene again next week. So please read up, and if there's information, we'd love to have it.